understanding how do we monitor, what's our role as a board, and really setting up for the superintendent once they're hired. This is the evaluation process, and here's how the process that we've just been through influences how we'll evaluate you as a superintendent, how we'll operate as a board. So essentially, when you go into FY 25, 26, you've got all of the mechanisms in place for how you'll function. You will have practiced in the spring how to do it. You will have set up for the incoming superintendent. These are our processes, our procedures, how we'll function, and this is how we'll interact with you, not only with the evaluation process, but with our board meetings, our monitoring process, et cetera. So before I go on, does all of that make sense? And I'll talk about FY 25.
Any questions for
questions
Dr.
about
Ray?
that?
Dr. Hart? All right, thank you.
All
You
right.
have a question? Vice President?
Just in relations to the evaluation, I don't know if we discussed this before. Are you guys training on super eval, or is the recommendation to try a different evaluation model away from super eval?
I didn't hear the second part of what you said.
Super eval, are you, when you're talking about the evaluation design, are you also incorporating super eval, or are you suggesting a different evaluation tool away from super eval?
You mean the state's evaluation process?
No, our evaluation tool is called super eval.
Yep, yours is.
Yeah.
What we'll do is suggest you, once you've created the goals and guardrails, what we'll suggest, and you can take it or leave it, but we'll take you through the process of what it means to then evaluate your superintendent based on progress against those goals, guardrails, interim guardrails that you've created. So essentially what you're saying is, here's our expectation for where the district is gonna go. We're gonna hold you accountable for whether or not you're making progress against those goals and guardrails that we've established. And so we'll suggest a process for that. It focuses both the superintendent and the district on accomplishing those goals that you've set forth. So we can talk through what that looks like.
Let me just clarify, because super eval is just a tool that we use. As board members, we were still expected to come up with goals and expectations
within
of
the eval
and
instrument?
within the instrument, yes. And I guess that's my question. Are you recommending that we continue to use super eval in the redesign, or are you going to make the suggestions on the redesign of the actual goals and the parameters and the monitoring, but within the super eval frame?
We can do it either way. I'll take a look at it. To be honest, I haven't looked at your super eval. So I'll go back and look at it, and we can make recommendations based on what's in there. What I will tell you is quite often the values that you establish that you want the superintendent to stay within are, we convert them to interim guardrails, which are numeric. The goals that you have and the interim goals that the superintendent has established are numeric. And so one of the things that we'll start to suggest to you is that you hold the superintendent accountable for measurable objectives that you set forth as a board. Quite often what state evaluations have of superintendents is other things. And we'll coach you away from those other things, because those other things take the focus away from what you really want to accomplish. Does that make sense? So with that, we'll go into 2025. In 2025, we have review and update board operating procedures. And I know that you all have a number of procedures, but what we want to do is first put you in a position of understanding, okay, where are we going? How are we operating? Now let's go back and revisit, now that we're operating and functioning and having conversations around monitoring the superintendent's progress, the district's progress. Let's go back and reevaluate our policies to see how they fit or not with where we are now. So that is that process of redoing and updating operating procedures, conducting a board policy diet. We do that with a number of our boards where there's a number of policies. Quite frankly, many of our boards have policies in place they haven't looked at in years. And so it's really going back and revisiting those policies, thinking through those policies. Are they reflective of where we want to be as a board? Are they reflective of the relationships that we want to have, et cetera, with the superintendent and the team and his team? After that, it's aligning the budget process to goals and guardrails. You're going to go through a budget process this year, but you haven't gone through the entire process of saying, here's how we'll do this. What you'll do once you've made a decision with the permanent superintendent is we'll start to talk you through how do you make sure you've aligned now the budget to the goals that you set, and you as a board, the superintendent's going to set that budget, but you as a board evaluating that proposed budget against the goals and the guardrails that you set. And so making sure that what you see in those goals and guardrails is what you would expect to see investments in accomplishing the goals that you set forth. Does that make sense?
Yes, I have a question, Dr. Hart. In terms of setting the budget to align with the goals and guardrails, I'm wondering if we should have our CFO a part of this, or how would this information get transferred to our CFO so that they're as familiar with this and what we're intending to do? How do we make sure that that department is familiar with this work?
Well, just as we work with the staff, we'll work with all the staff that you have in the district so they understand where we're going. As a matter of fact, one of the things we can also do is connect the CFO with other CFOs who have gone through the similar process. So there's CFOs in our member districts who have actually done a very good job of aligning when they, and I heard your CFO presentation in your board meeting as well, but going through the process of saying this is how these investments align with the goals and guardrails you set. But the most important thing I'll note is that, again, the alignment of the resources is not just, it's not a CFO process. The alignment of the resources is really the staff and the staff sitting down and saying, strategically, how do we accomplish this goal? What resources do we need to realign to accomplish this goal? And then how do we build that into the district's overall budget? Does that make sense?
It does.
So it's not just for the CFO to say,
Right.
here's what we're doing, or here's the budget. It's really for the staff to say, what do we need? What do we need to adjust in order for us to accomplish
Yeah, I
that?
just think it would be less resistance if staff comes into the CFO and that, they're on the same page.
They'll have to work
develop
together.
an effective budget, yes.
Yep. Just so you know, the time frame as well. So this time frame, remember I said this can go parallel, but this time frame about reviewing the budget process, about reviewing the superintendent's evaluation process, all of that is in lockstep with your whatever proposed timeline you'll have with hiring your superintendent, should it be your current interim superintendent or a new superintendent. Either way, it gives them an opportunity to slide into this process in a way that allows them to adjust the budget going into the following year, et cetera. So you're having all those conversations at the time you should have them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
So next is implementing the monthly monitoring progress. We're going to start, again, I talked about, we'll design and adopt a monthly monitoring calendar. We'll talk to you about what that is. And then implementing the monthly monitoring progress toward goals and guardrails. Again, we're going to practice that in the spring. So when we get to the spring, you'll actually be doing it based on the current goals, interim guardrails. But when you do it next fall, we'll finalize a full 5-year calendar where you'll know for 5 years out, depending on if you set your goals for 5 years, you'll know for 5 years out when a individual goal will be monitored, when an individual interim goal will be monitored, at what point during the year, which month, when a guardrail will be monitored, when you'll have board presentations on each of them. You'll know that for 5 years out. And you won't have to ask any questions about when will we know whether we're making progress on this goal or not, because you'll be able to see it. That is the monitoring calendar. So we'll finalize that process next year. And then developing ongoing two-way engagement structure with the community. So I talked earlier about listening to the community, getting feedback from the community. What we're going to propose is, as we get toward the end of this process, that you as a board make that a routine part of what you do as a board. And I want to delineate between going out and listening to the community versus what we're describing here. You as individual board members will go out and have conversations with your constituents, with your community members, with those that you represent all the time. It's a natural part of being a board member. When we talk about listening to the community, we talk about it from the standpoint of listening from your perspective, listening when you're not in a political situation or when you're not in a campaign situation where you have a script you're with a peer set of board members. You always go out in pairs is what we select, but have a script so that you as a board are routinely going out and listening to the community for their understandings of where you are in your process, your vision, your values, et cetera. And we'll talk about more about doing that as an ongoing process. And then the last piece is codifying the onboarding process for incoming board members and the community. And I know, President Elliott, you just mentioned a few moments ago this board may change. But one of the things that you'll want to be cognizant of is that as you bring in new board members, you'll want to make sure they understand the process, they understand what you've gone through in terms of developing the process, and that they understand how, as a board member, this is what governance looks like in Rochester City Schools. Here's how we do it. And so their own vision for the schools is a part of what all of you bring to the table. So you won't lose that as an individual, but understanding how we as individuals bring that to the governance model that we've applied for our schools. So that's a high-level overview of kind of where we want to go for the next 2 years. All of it is open to discussion. You all can feel free to tweak it. We are prepared to make adjustments as you see fit to where you want to go, how you want to get there. And I'm also happy to answer any questions that you might have about any of the individual items that you see. In addition to that, the only thing I want to add is that there is another document on the back. This document will adjust as well. You'll see some overlap, and we can't see it because it's really small here, but you'll be able to. You can see it on your computers. I'll adjust this so it is a quarterly Gantt chart of what's happening when, but it all depends. Part of it depends on, and I've got two things here. Part of it depends on whether or not you want to do community listening or not. And it's actually in your, I sent you the document by email, so I know you can't read this one. But part of it depends on whether you want to do community listening or not, whether you feel like you need to or if you have enough information. And if you don't, we'll make major adjustments to this because I've got things in here twice, depending upon if you choose to or if you choose not to. So, Madam Chair, that is kind of an overview of the implementation plan, and I'll be happy to answer any questions that the board might have.
Are there any questions for Dr. Hart? Commissioner Simmons?
Thank you for the high-level overview. I do have a question around the policy diet, the board policy diet, and I see that it's down around the June through October timeframe. And recognizing we do have the flexibility to identify components that can be moved up if we all agree, because I do personally believe that's something we might want to consider sooner than later.
Okay. I still wouldn't do it before you've started to, at least in the spring, practice. And we can move that up if you like as well. But until you've had an opportunity to start to practice what monitoring looks like, because it will influence, okay, now I understand what needs to be adjusted in this policy. Does that make sense? So that would be we can definitely move it up. That is not a problem, but I would think through making sure you're well on your way toward understanding how we want to operate before you start that process. Otherwise, you'll change the policy, and then you'll get a kind of realize, oh, wait a minute, this is different than I thought, and you have to go back and adjust it.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. I appreciate that. Yeah, it's definitely finding where it would make sense to do it. So not just doing it, but certainly identifying when and how that we would need to do it. Thank you.
So to that point, Dr. Hart, in terms of streamlining our policies, I would think that we would have to also take into consideration the historical context of policies, that we may not just be able to remove a policy without understanding it in its historical context.
I always say, don't tear down a fence if you don't know why it was built in the first place.
All right,
So understand why the fence was put up before you tear it down. What we'll also do, and you have the benefit of not just yourself looking at your own policies. If there's a policy that you're stuck on, you have the benefit of us being able to go to other districts around the country and saying, here's a similar policy in a different district that might inform what you're thinking about doing. Here's how they do it. We can pick any other district in the country, but we can find policies that mirror what you're trying to do.
All right, thank you. Any other questions for Dr. Hart? All right, Commissioner Malloy?
Thank you. Just in my work that I've done for the last 2 years with the Council for Great City Schools, they talk a lot about committee diets as well. And I think in the board members that I've met from districts that have adopted this governance model, they always seem really surprised that we have the committees that we have. And they're like, you have so many meetings, per month. And so I've always known the committee structure that we've had. We have a committee of the whole structure. That's all I've ever known when I've been on the board. But it's my understanding that we didn't always have that structure on the board, that we didn't meet as a committee of the whole. So I'm not necessarily talking about eliminating committees, but I'm very interested in a committee diet type work, because I think that the way that we have it structured currently kind of encourages like siloed ways of addressing issues in our district that might not otherwise happen if we were structured differently.
Happy to. We moved the committee, kind of the committee revision process further back in your board deliberations, just because you're in the process now, you're going to go through this school year. However, I will share that we can have the committee conversation about, and there's a series of questions. We won't ask you to or tell or suggest to you that you keep or get rid of any committee. What we will do, however, is ask you about the purpose of the committee, what the committee is designed to accomplish, and whether or not the committee was set up to do board work or inputs out. We've had the conversation about inputs and outputs. So if the committee was set up to manage inputs or to somehow influence what superintendent work is, then we have a series of questions that we'll ask you about what that looks like, why the committee is in place, and if it's in place for something other than board work, suggesting a process for sunsetting the committee work. But that will be your call, not our call, but we can walk you through the process. We can do that at any time. It doesn't matter. We can start that process whenever you feel comfortable.
Vice President LeBron?
I want to start that process at the next meeting that we're all together. I just want to put it out there. I just want to also respond to what Commissioner Malloy just said. It actually was the distinguished educator's recommendation that we move away from the committees of the three because of silos, because silos were forming in that, and board members didn't trust each other, and so it always led to arguments and so forth. But I will also say, like, one of the things that I pushed for when I first got here was more transparency by going live. That was a feature we didn't have. We used to record on YouTube, record our meetings and then upload them after the fact, right? But we have live technology both on YouTube and Facebook. And I do think because of those two features that I would support going back to the three committees of the three, as long as that they were still live. I think that that's an issue and a conversation that the board has to have, because it does come with an additional cost. So if we make one decision, it will cost us more money. And then I'm always conscious about how we're making decisions and spending money away from classrooms, right? Because these are sort of adult focus-centered things. But I would love to have that conversation. I absolutely know that we have committees that should not exist, including the Human Resources one. That is one that we sort of compromised on. There was some board trying to do administration stuff that we landed us in creating that committee, but it didn't exist prior to. Audit by law has to audit finance policy. The rest is just, we eliminated governance. We had a whole committee on governance that was crazy too. So would totally support that. I do think there has to be the pros and cons conversation of the cost. There still has to be that transparency. And I just want to also just share that when they were committees of the three, they were public meetings. So even though they were being recorded, uploaded later, the public was still allowed to come in, including other board members. But sometimes that would create a quorum. And if a board members in that meeting made a decision, that created other issues. So these are the pitfalls that we have to be mindful of when we have these conversations and as we move forward. But I would love to have a committee diet, 100%.
So we can raise that whenever you like. And I'll also go back to the silos conversation that you started with. Having committees that are three requires you to have really, really strong communications processes. And so you've really got to make sure that all of your board members are still informed about what the committee or the three heard that everyone didn't hear. And so sometimes that can be a challenge, and it will lead to spending more time clarifying after than it does actually getting work done. So, but again, we won't dictate to you if you structure your committees, how you structure your committees. We won't dictate that to you, but we will ask you a series of questions and force you to answer those questions about what the purpose of the committee is, what it's accomplishing, and as you shared, is this required by law? So that is one of the questions in our list of questions. Is this required by law? If so, the other question is how much of it is required by law? Because you might have a committee like audit might be required by law, but you might be stretching the boundaries of what it is legally that you need to address.
Commissioner Simmons?
Thank you. And so, yeah, I'm glad that this conversation is flushing out a bit because it aligns somewhat with the policy diet that I'm hoping for. I do, excuse me, my throat. I do kind of align with the thought process that more is not always, does not always equate to quality. And so we've got a million policies that we're trying to muddle through. And I love what the president expressed as far as understanding the historical context of those policies and which ones are relevant. So we would have to comb through and do the homework. But that committee diet, to Commissioner Malloy's point, is essential as well. I just think we need an and with both of these, and I'll stop there. But I do recognize we have to do that legwork to understand the lay of the land before we make any type of prominent decision. So I want both of them leaned out.
Commissioner Malloy?
If I may, Madam
Oh,
President,
Dr.
I'll just say the process I shared earlier about the policy diet, you want to get comfortable with kind of really understanding the process. Committee, on the other hand, does not require that same kind of background, if you will.
Commissioner Malloy?
Thank you. And I think, excuse me. Sorry about that. When I was talking about the committee diet as well, I think that whatever time that we do have to spend together as board members to have discussions should be spent more so, I think, on progress monitoring of the academic goals. And I think that with a committee diet, that might enable us to schedule other times to meet together to actually work on that progress monitoring instead. So I think of so many of our conversations that end up being very adult outcome oriented, maybe just in how we've structured our meetings to begin with, that conversations that maybe might seem important at the time, but maybe are more focused on adult issues rather than what our students need at that given moment.
And to that point, I think that that's something that we have to learn because I would think that all of the adult conversations that we had were based on to get us to student outcomes. So we've got to learn what that means. But the other question that I have is for, if I can say this, Superintendent, is you met with staff today and wondering from the staff, what do you think about this process and what do you think in terms of the board going through this process? And can we do this? Can we do this as a team? Meaning, can we do this as board? Can we do this as staff? And let me just have the superintendent to weigh in on that first.
Good evening, President Elliott. Yes, today, actually, I had the opportunity to present in front of my executive cabinet a little rendition of what we went through for the past 2 days, explaining to each of them that they are the genesis of transformation. Very much excited about the work around student outcomes, and definitely there was a lot of reflecting pieces as to why we're not getting to where we need to go and seeing the results. And a lot of that stems around just us not being hyper-focused on the outcomes and really focused on processes and, how our work at times, unfortunately, because of the day-to-day, is interfered with. And we know why that happens. It happens because we all care. It happens because we have constituents. It happens because we love what we do, but some of those things are also hindering the progress that we're able to make because we can't spend the time on the inputs and making sure that we have the right inputs to get those outcomes. But from what I saw with the staff today, and a few of them are here, and feel free to buzz in if they'd like. There was real excitement about the direction that we all are going as a group.
Okay, Commissioner Griffin?
Thank you for the information that you're providing to us. For me, I feel that like you said from the beginning, we have to look within ourselves, and when we heal within ourselves, then we can have a positive outcome. So I think everything you're saying is right, as long as we can fix ourselves first, then we can move forward. So everything on here that you have is addressing with what I can do better to make these work. So I thank you for that. So that's what I'm doing. I'm listening to you and taking in everything you say, and it's always the person that what I have to do to make things better by vetting all this information that you're providing us with. And that's what I take away from it. Thank you.
Thank you. What I will share is at the end of this process, you are going to like me very much because we will push back on just how you ask questions, what you say, how you engage with the superintendent's staff. Just know that that's part of the process. You won't like me in the end. I'm okay with that. But it's really to get you to a place where you can help the district and the staff. And I'll share with you the staff kind of a brief overview. It's about 40 minutes. We'll take them through kind of the same process that you went through so they have a full understanding. But one of the things that a staff member said was, these are the questions I wish the board would ask me. And it's the exact questions that we have outlined kind of in our monitoring process. And that's what we want to make sure the staff is having conversations about and then bringing back to you, here are the things that we're doing to actually improve student outcomes so that you can hear that part of the process.
So conversely of that, they mentioned what kinds of questions the board is asking that does not align up with questions of our
We didn't get
goals?
into the questions in detail, so we didn't go
Okay.
into a detail, but
Okay.
I can tell you from listening to some of your board meetings, it'll be a shift for you in terms
Yeah.
of the types of questions you ask. It will be, in the long run, better, but it'll feel different as you go through it. Does
And I
that
would
make
just
sense?
point out, again, this is new to all of us. We come from the community. And so we don't always know the right question to ask. And so I'm very, very excited about this process to ensuring that we are asking the right questions. And while we may not be asking the right questions, one of the things that I'm asking superintendent and the staff, help us to know, help us to learn, manage up, because we don't always know the right questions to ask. Now, we will probably come from the community with some questions, but help us to make sure that we're doing our due diligence, because we don't always know the right questions to ask. Let me just open up, is there any of the staff members that would want to share anything from your meeting with Dr. Hart today? And how we can work together?
I think that the synchronicity between what the board is doing and what we're trying to do and what was introduced today, sorry, to the staff, it will really help us to, once again, keep all of our eyes on the prize, to accept, just like you just said, our personal responsibility and what our role is in doing that, plus what our role is in working with everyone else to achieve, because even though we take personal responsibility, we don't achieve outcomes by ourselves. So I think all of those conversations will lead to articulated, straightforward, simply stated, but beautifully implemented action plans to achieve what we need to achieve.
Yeah, and I think what's going to help is that if we're helping each other. So if I go off rail, somebody pull me back on top, and I'm open to that. So And that's what all of us should be doing, that we should be, because we're not going to remember everything, and Commissioner Griffin may remember something I don't. Pull me back on task. So I think that's going to be very useful in our own learning and how we get better in this process, in this governance process. So, any other questions for Dr. Hart? Commissioner Patterson?
Yeah, I think one thing that, I haven't heard that when we did the training and things like that, I've listened to everyone in the room and we're saying we instead of I. And as far as the training, we're supposed to be using that I think this or, I think that, rather than saying we, because the we may not include everyone in the room. If everyone understands what I'm saying.
I hate that though, I guess, but that's me. Commissioner Santiago, you got it?
Yeah, I just wanted to.
I understand it though.
Yeah, I know that the questions are close to over, so I just wanted to just share that I agree with the plan moving forward. I'm definitely excited to move and shift to a place where we are focused on student outcomes. We're focused on the plans that we have moving forward and hoping the best for this district and doing the work to allow this district to shine the way that it can shine. And it will shine as long as we are supporting it and we are supporting the people and the person that we hire to make the work happen. And so just appreciate the plan and excited for the move forward. And it is important, that every board member we're all focused on our eyes. We all have something that maybe we weren't the best in or a question that we might not have asked right. But I think that is an important aspect to it also. And of course it takes work, as you said, President Elliott, it takes work and it takes some time to reflect. But as long as we do that, and accept even the things that we may not be best at individually, and move forward with actions and plans, I think that we'll get there. So appreciate the plan and excited for the process forward.
Thank you, Commissioner Santiago. Let me see if my state monitor will have any words to say. Our state monitor.
Thank you, President Elliott. I think this is a great opportunity for the board to work together with the staff, and instead of being just the we, it's just I, all of us, like Commissioner Patterson is saying, moving the agenda forward, and that there's only one agenda for the school district, and it's about student outcome, working together, that when one commissioner is saying, what the staff is saying is just working together to improve student achievement in the district for all the students in the district. So yes, we do have a lot of policies that we haven't visited in years. Yes, we have many committees that probably we don't need all of them, but the direction that the district is going to move is forward, and that we will see an increase in student achievement in the district.
Thank you, State Monitor. Commissioner Simmons?
Yes, I just wanted to kind of ask this question because it's a matter of conviction for myself, right? And so when we talk about, so I recognize there is a complete difference between advocacy and governance, right? That looks completely different. And I'm finding myself in a space where sometimes things are brought to your attention where you can redirect and the bucket that this is not my purview, let me redirect you over here. And the issue continues to present itself through different community members, whatever the case is, where you're saying, what is really going on? And the conviction I'm dealing with is, how do you stand up or show up on behalf of a community who said, hey, we want you in this seat. Something is seriously wrong over here in this corner, and we're struggling with it, and we've seen this person come, this person go, but we don't feel like it's getting the attention. Now, myself, I feel that I know how to show up in a space and act like I have good sense, right? I know my purview. If I walk into a space to just observe or just demonstrate that I do support it, I'm not getting in anyone's face, questioning their staff members or getting out of line in that manner. I know how to conduct myself professionally. But how do I weigh those pieces? Like, I don't want to tell them, well, we'll have the superintendent look at it, because it's ultimately something that I would bring, and I have that relationship. I'll bring him, the concerns that have been presented to me. But
I think there are two things. So two responses to that. The first of which is, as a board, one of the things you want to keep in mind is that your responsibility in governance is to govern as a board, which is a unit, not individual members directing individual staff or the superintendent on, I heard this over here and you need to go address that. So as a board, part of the goals and guardrails process is to say, this is what we collectively believe in as a board, and this is the collective direction that we want to take the district. Now, that's not to say that there aren't individual things that may crop up. What you want to make sure you do between the board and the superintendent as well is to make sure there's a communication process in place. And a lot of times the superintendent and his staff will have far greater understanding of some of the idiosyncrasies of a particular instance in a school or in a building or with a parent. And you have to trust them to say, I'm going to take care of this. Once you turn it over, you've turned it over. So asking that individual, have you talked to your principal or go through the process that the district has set forth for addressing that,
And I'm
that
sorry
issue?
to interrupt you, not so much an individual, but a theme at maybe at a particular school. So in other words, it's not even, hey, Commissioner Simmons, can you help me with this? It's something's wrong over here.
Yep.
And
So-
we're imploding in this space, and it's multiple, not even individuals, but like collective.
So that's why you want to, as a board, do that collective community listening process. So you remember I talked about listening to the community for their values and their vision. That collective process will reveal those themes. If you haven't done it, then you as a board don't have an idea of what the themes are in the district. Does that make sense? You have what you're hearing individually, but you haven't yet put together what is a theme. Those themes should become your values or your vision for what you expect students to accomplish. That's why you come back to this space. But again, one of the things that we will share, and we talked about this earlier, as you go through the goals and guardrails process, you'll create 5 goals, which you've done, maximum of 5 guardrails. Those are the themes that you want the superintendent to address. That doesn't mean throughout the year that other things won't come up that you'll need to be briefed on as a board, but those are briefings. It's more, here's what the district is doing. I'd heard the CFO talk the other day about your ERP system. So the ERP system is something where the superintendent may say, I'm going to come back and brief the board, not in our board meeting, but in a separate venue on how our rollout of our ERP system is going. It's an expensive system. It's a big system. It involves multiple departments. So the superintendent will say, hey, I'll give you a briefing on the ERP system at this particular point in the year, but it's not something where in your board meetings, you're constantly having a conversation about the rollout of the ERP system. Does that make sense? So again, the themes that you talked about, if they're themes, they have to be themes that you as a board collectively see. It can't just be the theme that I see. It has to be the theme that we as a board see. That becomes the value that we ask the superintendent to address. Does that
Commissioner
make sense?
Santiago?
Yeah, and I think that you kind of partially answered this question, but there are those things that we either get approached about while we're in the community, or get phone calls, or while we're at community events, have community members walking up to us, and sometimes there's things that collectively you hear from different community members about a certain issue, a certain area, a certain incident, and even past or, many times past, you have these issues, you approach and you speak about it. But I guess my question is, what are the asks? How do we put that charge in for the superintendent to figure this issue out, or this issue that's going on? That's obviously a big issue in the district, or something that's very pressing in the district. Without, because we can speak about, numbers and we can speak about percentages, but if there's a school where there's gang activity in, and the gang activity is not being, and this is just an example, but the gang activity is not being addressed in the way that it could be addressed the best, and us as the community representatives are at fear of possibly students being injured, students being hurt, and it's not being addressed in the way that's the best, for the district, then how do we get to a point where we're asking for action or something to be dealt with without getting too much, into the weeds of things? Because that's not quantitative. That's more qualitative in what's going on in the area. And so, I guess that's my question, because even when you look at boards of businesses, When there's big pressing issues, sometimes those boards will get, and have an ask. And so I'm just asking with this board, the school board, how do we put in that motion or put in that charge on this is a pressing issue that we fear of, that may be affecting the academic outcomes, that may be affecting the safety of the children, and we need it to be fixed.
So going back, you described a perfect process for why you have guardrails, and it's why you have values. So student safety is a value that you all consistently hear across the community. Student safety should actually be a guardrail for you. And we can work with you on drafting the language, but safety is something that you want to make sure, what you're really saying to the superintendent, we want you to accomplish these goals, but as you move forward with accomplishing these goals, don't live within these boundaries. So don't allow safety to be compromised in your challenge, in your addressing the goals that we've set forth. So if safety is a value of the district, by all means, it should be a guardrail. But again, it's something that you collectively as a board see and hear. The other thing that happens with goals and guardrails, both. So it happens with both of them. What if you say, we're going to set a guardrail for 5 years around safety? You do want to have some quantitative measures around whether or not your students are safe and feel comfortable in the school environment. The superintendent sets those up. You set guardrails around them. Here's what we're trying to accomplish around student safety. What happens if after you say you set it up for 5 years, we want you to accomplish this in 5 years, but you accomplish it in 2.5? What happens? Say again?
You can revisit creating other guardrails, other things might have come up.
Revisit creating I see why the echo is bad, because it's hard to
I'm
hard to
sorry,
hear.
so
Apologize.
maybe revisit the guardrails that we have, and
If you,
they
as
might
you
need to be
accomplish,
revised.
as you accomplish the guardrails and the goals that you have, you can go back and revisit them and set new sets of guardrails, new sets of goals. As you address issues, so as a superintendent, you say, superintendent, this is a priority issue. We want you to address this value. So these are the top 5 that we've set. As you address one, once it's addressed, you can move on to another priority issue. The real issue for you as a board, and this is the key, if everything is a priority, then nothing's a priority. So if there's an issue that you really want the superintendent to address, you set it as a guardrail. If you try to throw everything at the superintendent and say, fix all of this, nothing's going to get fixed because it's impossible to do. So, the critical thing is, and I understand the advocacy, the critical thing is understanding that as a board, as a collective, this is what the collective wants you to address, or value, what we want you to adhere to as you progress toward achieving the goals.
And I just like one of the conflicts I think with that, and you may be able to answer this, is that many times, let's say safety, for example, or let's say, resource or mental health projects, or, whatever it is, nothing will ever be at 100%. And we hope so. Like, we push for that. But the reality many times is things may not hit 100%. And if we're getting these complaints about a certain school or a certain area, and many times that certain school may get less resources, or may just be the dumping ground of bad staff or different things of that sort, because we're not supposed to focus, and from what I've been hearing, is not focusing on a certain school or a certain area, but many times there's certain schools in this district that get overlooked. And so I guess my question to you is, when we have those certain areas and those certain schools that we have concerns about, how do we do our best to make sure that those schools are getting the attention that they deserve?
You can absolutely, and we can walk you through the process, but you can absolutely write a guardrail that says no school will go below this X. And so thou shalt not operate a school in the district that doesn't do at least this. So we talk about the thou shalt nots. We talked about the guardrails already, but that is perfectly reasonable guardrail.
Okay.
It might be-
Commissioner Simmons?
I think that helps a little bit, because I was thinking around, like, when you're supervising people, right? A person, and I'll use you as an example respectfully, Dr. Hart, like, you're not getting your work done, right? And I have a whole team sitting around here, and I can say, we've got to get our work done, but instead of having that direct conversation with you, you can sit among this team and be like, yeah, we got to get our work done, right? You got folks that are like, yeah, we got to stop talking to the superintendent. And it's like, you're the main one doing it, right? So sometimes I think you have to have that explicit conversation. And so that's where I was struggling, because if it's a specific school, I definitely want safety for all schools, but then if this particular school is it just continues to resurface.
Just
Like,
write-
I don't,
Yeah, write a guardrail that says this is the minimum expectation across our schools.
okay.
Commissioner Malloy?
And it won't say
Yeah,
this
just
is the
similar-
minimum expectation, this is thou shalt not, so I won't go into details, but yes, you can write a thou shalt not. And then, again, keep in mind, the superintendent will then interpret the guardrails that you've established and turn those into a quantitative measure that then, when that value is reported on, so when you're addressing that value of that guardrail, superintendent's gonna come back and report on, here's how we're doing with this guardrail across our buildings and across the district.
Commissioner Malloy?
Thank you. Yeah, and as we go through the guardrail setting process, we're going to obviously learn a lot more about what that looks like. And as Dr. Hart was saying, it's the parameters that we give the superintendent. We're not telling the superintendent how to accomplish or get to school safety or how to get to equity, but it's more, we're providing those parameters and those thou shalt not statements. And so as a board, I would assume that we're going to be having a retreat on this, or these are part of the conversations we'll be having and community
That's all the
listening?
will of the board, and that's what's been recommended. We said
Yeah,
that.
so, I mean, very often, like, when we talk about guardrails, and obviously we haven't gone through any of this yet, but, you know, if your goal is to get to the airport and you need to call an Uber to get to the airport, you know what your destination is. It's to get to the airport so you don't miss your flight. And when you get into that Uber, maybe you happen to know there's a lot of construction taking place on 490, and you absolutely don't want the driver to take 490 because you know it's going to slow things down. A guardrail would be telling your driver, get me to the airport on time so long as you don't take 490, right? They can do whatever else they need to do to get you to the airport for your flight on time, but you've given them parameters around the expectations about what value you want, I guess, sustained, right? So anyway, I'm looking forward to that process. I know normally that's a process that you do when you make your goals. So I'm looking forward to us sitting down and having those conversations, because I really like what Commissioner Santiago brought up. Like, there definitely are concerns that are very specific to many of our buildings, or concerns that come our way about other types of safety, like chlorine gas clouds in swimming pool areas causing kids to get sick, right? Like, swimming pool, swim team, this type stuff. It's really specific. How do we ensure that our kids, it sounds like safety is an issue that we all share. It's not just around necessarily violence in schools, but it can entail a lot of other things too. And also equity, making sure there's equitable stuff happening at all of our buildings.
All right, thank you. Didn't know if you want to respond to that. Are you good? All right, Commissioner Griffin?
I guess one thing that I for myself am kind of, I don't even know if this word confused is the right word. From my experience, and I know this is a different dynamic because a corporation is ran differently in some aspects, not all. But when you know that there's a problem or an issue in an area, then we always address the problem or concern, because that department, if failed, could weaken the whole business or the whole corporation, and it can make the company go under, per se, right? So when I look at the dynamics of our schools and I see that, okay, there's a need here, my first instinct is to say, hey, here's the data, here's what we have versus what's going on here. These are the areas we need to fix. So I take that same thought process and say, hey, this data over here says this, this is this, and this is what needs to be fixed to make it right. So when I compare the two, if you have the information in front of you and you are collecting the information needed, you'll be able to tell year by year what's missing, what's needed. And if you don't have a school over here that's in receivership, you definitely don't want it to go there. So how can we prevent this from going to receivership, keeping it afloat and making sure the other ones stay where they need to, they are and come out of receivership, because we don't want to go backwards, right? So if we have a school that's not in receivership, how do we maintain the stability of that school so we don't have to go, and have to change the name again or something like that? That is a major concern that I hear from a lot from our communities, for myself. So and the only thing that I can say is that somebody's not looking at data, or somebody's not doing something right. And that is why we need that guardrail to say, listen, if this school is not in receivership, then we need to make sure to keep it out of receivership and address the needs of that school so that we are keeping it away from that area, And that's a concern that I have. I don't know how anyone else looks at things, and I can't tell somebody how to look at something or to relate to something, but I look at the numbers and the dynamics, quantitative and qualitative measurements, things that are going to tell me in black and white what is working and what is not working, and what we need to fix over here to make sure we're not doing the same thing that these other schools went through as far as failure. So I think that's for me, for personally. So if it's not there in black and white for me, how are you fixing something when you don't have it in black and white? What do you know is wrong? What do you know is right? You guessing? Because I don't know what you're doing, so I can't understand it. And I could be wrong. There's a lot of dynamics to a school and making sure it stays afloat. I don't know everything, but I just know if we have information in front of us that we can work with, I'm thinking that may help us make better decisions in resolving the matters that we have in the district. Like, again, I'm not an expert. I'm just doing it on face value and what my experience is working in corporate America for over 30 years. That's all.
Vice President LeBron?
Did you want to respond to that?
If I can.
Oh, sure.
That is exactly what the role of the board is. That's exactly why the board sets goals and guardrails for the superintendent. The question, and you all have heard me ask this before, so I'll ask this one again. Who supervises the superintendent? How many bosses does the superintendent have? 7. Who hired the superintendent? Yeah, who hired the superintendent? The board hired the superintendent. The board the superintendent has 1 supervisor. The superintendent does not have 7 supervisors. If the superintendent has 7 supervisors, that school that you want to get fixed will never get fixed. And the reason it will never get fixed is because the superintendent is trying to do what each individual board member is asking, and it's going to take the superintendent of the district in multiple directions. So the power that you have as a board member in fixing that school is the power that you have in setting goals for the superintendent that are collective, that say, here's where we want you to take the district. What will happen is that the superintendent recognizes, I can't achieve that goal if I leave all the kids in one school well below the target. I can't, I may be able to do it, but in all likelihood, I can't achieve the targets unless I address, and I'll give you an example. Typically, if I'm looking at students who are English language learners or students who are in poverty, I recognize that I've got that in multiple schools, not just in that one school. So I need to put practices in place with my staff that address all of their educational needs. So I recognize, yes, I have a problem here, but I've got to address that problem for all the school students in the district. Your power as a board is not in telling the superintendent one at a time, fix this issue, this issue, this issue, put out that fire, put out that fire. It won't, you won't move forward as a district that way. And you haven't moved forward as a district that way. It's the reason the district is languished where it has. Your power is when you say to the superintendent and the staff, this is what we want you to accomplish. Go figure out how to get there, and then share with us how you plan to do it, and allow us to assess, do we really feel like that plan is going to get us there? And then you hold the superintendent accountable for getting there. And it will happen.
And to piggyback off of what you just said, I think the biggest thing is, the bottom line is for us, for me, when I look at a board dynamic, is we have to have one thing in common. And the commonality is the love for the children. And I think if we put the children first, then we could accomplish a lot of things. But for me, I know I love children, and I can't speak for anybody else. I would think that they do, but I'm using the I thing here. But I feel if the love is for one common denominator, the children, then I think we can accomplish these things. I really do. And I think that it's so many different dynamics, to a board. And I'm always learning. We learn every day. Everybody learns every day something new, right? So for that reason, I just think that we just have that one common denominator would set the whole thing off. I think, for me, that not for anyone, I can't speak for anyone else, but I think that love is
I'll take that, and I
strong.
know you've got a question, so I'll respond quickly, and then we'll go to
Yeah,
your question.
but what I did want to say is, did what Dr. Hart say make sense to you? And I know you're always asking that, does it make sense? Let me just ask you, Commissioner Griffin, did what Dr. Hart say make sense to you?
Everything he says makes sense.
Okay.
He's an expert, so I'm taking everything in. Everything he says is making sense to me.
Okay.
And I'm just saying, for me, that one common denominator, but it's a lot more to that. It's like communication, it's respect, it's everything. But, for me, that's one thing that if I feel it would be a common denominator as well.
Let me go back to an important point about being on the board. Everybody in this room can love children. Is everybody in this room going to agree on how to address the needs of improving student outcomes? The answer is no. Everybody can love children. Everybody can have a love for kids, bring that to the table. You as a board, one of the things that we shared in the training, and I'll share it again now, it's not our expectation that you agree with each other. You're not going to agree with each other. But when you make decisions, it's why as a board you take a vote. You take a vote and you say the majority of the board feels as though we should go in this direction. If the majority of the board feels that we should go in this direction, that is what you share with the superintendent. This is the direction that we as a board expect you to move in. So individually, you can't accomplish, you're not going to all agree. Not say you can't accomplish. Individually, you're not going to all agree on every item that comes before the board, or even you might not as a board agree on all the guardrails. But the collective board is what sets the guardrails to provide the direction for the district.
Vice President?
Sorry, Madam Vice President.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for that additional clarity, especially because I want to recognize and uplift that there are listening audience members. And I'll say that I do think that my experience over the last 21 years in this district, and what I've observed as well as a parent and now a grandparent, is that previous boards, and this is not something unique to just the Rochester City School District. This also applies to other districts across the state. It also applies to even County Ledge and City Council, have not also educated the community about these roles and where the actual power lies, right? City Council requires 5 votes, the school board requires 4. And me personally, I don't have to like someone if there's still a collective goal. I can work towards a collective goal. In fact, I actually despise having to try to respect or like someone that I'm never going to respect and like because they've already shown me their character. But I can focus on a goal and work on that goal in that moment. When I leave here, am I going to invite you out to dinner? No, because I don't like you and I don't respect you and I don't want to be around you. But I'm elected to do this job, so I'm going to come and do everything I need to do to participate in these meetings in the manner I'm supposed to. I just wanted to go back, though, to, I'm still on guardrail conversation, so to when Commissioner Santiago was talking, that, for me, too, I would personally love to figure out how those guardrails are embedded within the budget, because I've talked about this in the past, right? When I first started, we had a budget process that at the end of the deliberations, the chair would go back to all the board members and say, okay, give me your priorities. And then they would come up with this list. And it's my personal belief that this is also what led to, over time, the deficit. It didn't happen in one budget year, right? It was like sort of creeping little by little. But in part is because the board would have the administration go through an entire process, and then right before the vote, sort of have these priorities and say, these are the board priorities, and if you don't support this, you're not going to get the votes, right? So then you have the administration scrambling after they've spent all these deliberations figuring out how to meet these demands, make the adjustments, put things back in, oftentimes not even understanding long-term implications on the budget, but where's that money coming from? We already made the cuts and we took from here, now we're adding back, but we're not taking it. So over time, like, these are the things that not just led to the student outcomes that we had, but even put us in the financial situation that we were in a few years back. And for me, this all has like ripple effects on all of these things. So I would love to figure that out. And I also want to appreciate that if we're talking about public safety, for me, I personally, and this is my plea to my colleagues who are of the same mindset, that we recognize and understand that that is not law enforcement. It's never going to be law enforcement in this school, and it's never going to be law enforcement as the answer in this community. We're going to continue to see the same outcomes because there's a fundamental core issue happening for families and students that need to be addressed. And I want to uplift that it's not only the responsibility of this district to address that, because they're coming in with these core issues from the community, but that we're also looking at our city and county government as partners to say, this is what we can do when we have these babies in our possession from 9 to 5 or 7 to 3. But what are you doing when they leave here? What are the opportunities available to them after school on weekends? How are we taking care of our families and how are we working together? Because I do think that this is a much deeper rooted issue of misinformation over time. And I do think because of that, this is why community members come to board members with issues versus coming to a board member to say, hey, who do I need to speak to at the district for this issue, versus giving me the entire issue and then saying, hey, I need you to help me solve this. I've little by little have been sort of redirecting individuals as well. And then also educating them. We have thousands and thousands and thousands of students and babies that we're responsible for, thousands of employees. Yeah, 1 to 10, there's a parameter of issues we're gonna have, right? 10% or whatever the case may be, but there's always going to be issues, in my opinion, because it's such a large system. There's always going to be complaints. There's always going to be a quote-unquote fire to put out. But I don't get paid 6 figures like the administration, and I had to realize like 2 years into my board role that I don't get paid as much as these individuals to problem solve. And I need them to problem solve if it's a salary that they get. More than happy in the future to consider a role, but I don't get paid to do their job. And I also have to fall back and give them the grace to be able to do their job and earn that living. But if I'm constantly sending emails, making accusations, going to staff, showing up at the board, at central office, or popping up at schools unexpectedly. We had to put a whole parameter around board members showing up at schools because of that. And that didn't feel good, having to actually write a policy to tell board members who are adults how to visit a school, conduct themselves. To me, that's all a waste of like our time. But again, we didn't have training. We've never had training. And that's just the reality. What we've had was the focus on restorative, because the focus wanted to be on building these relationships. And again, for myself, I know who I am. I'm an old person at this point. If I don't vibe and like you, there's no restorative practice that will ever make me like you. But I can still work with you if we are focused on the work. That's it.
All right. Commissioner Santiago, were you next? I'm sorry, Commissioner Malloy, and I'll come back to you, Commissioner Santiago.
I appreciate all of the sentiments that have been expressed. And I think that when we go to set the guardrails, I would like to know when, I see on here, just on the calendar, that community listening sessions are planned, or if they're needed, based on the superintendent's search. And then there's, we have to execute the community listening program. Do we have to do all of those things before we can sit down and actually set some guardrails? Because I think that the board has been hearing about many of these issues, and I think can probably deliberate as a body on some of the community values. And there's a lot of passion there too. And I think that we're in a place where we're ready to have those discussions. We have our goals already made.
So if you feel as though you're, as the board, that you have listened to the community, that you feel as though you have heard what the values are as a part of the listening process, then yes, you can deliberate and begin the process of creating your guardrails. And we can do that with you. So we can come back.
Yeah,
We'll take you
obviously.
through that process. And we can do it, we really do it the same. We can do that. I'll schedule time to do it. We can come back and do that, come back and do the committee process if you'd like to do that. That's one of the questions that I'll ask Madam President if we want to move up into the earlier timeframe. Well, we can do those if you feel like you are in that place. If you feel like you've listened to the community and you can adequately reflect what the values of the community are, then yes. You can.
I
If
think
not,
that-
then I would strongly urge you to go listen to the community first and then come back and do that process.
And we also don't have months and months to engage in that process as well. And ultimately, it comes down to 4 votes, right? We want, I mean, it is, that's what it is. And we need to have that conversation. But I also think that we should have that conversation sooner rather than later. And I think if we have guardrails in place, I truly believe that some of the other conversations that we've been having or the concerns that have been expressed by commissioners regarding protocols, et cetera, I think we can alleviate a lot of that. It'll help us better understand superintendent work versus board work. I know I will benefit from that as well, having those parameters already set. So if that's something that we could move up, I would appreciate it. And I know there's definitely topics that people are passionate about. We've had conversations on the dais that I think are reflective of a lot of those community values. That doesn't mean we don't listen to the community, but prolonging this weeks and weeks and in months and months, we're going to continue to see some of these same problems cropping up over and over again.
All right,
So,
thank you, Commissioner.
Madam Chair, and before we go, I just want to make sure, I've heard now 2 things that I think the board needs to decide before we leave. One is whether or not to move the committee conversation up earlier into the process. And then 2, whether or not the board feels as though you've adequately listened to the community to proceed with doing, you've already got goals, so proceed with doing guardrails without having to do that process. And I would suggest you decide that as a board.
And the other one was moving the community listening sessions up and
Committee.
The committee conversation, President Elliott?
committee conversation or community
No,
conversation?
committee.
Committee,
Say
the
Committee.
committee
Okay.
conversations.
So that's what you said, committee conversation or community?
The committee diet is the committee diet process.
He said there's 2 pieces.
No, I didn't say anything.
Yeah.
Dr.
That you have to
Hart said.
decide as
Let me
a
just go
board.
back to Commissioner Malloy for
So Dr. Hart
clarification.
was giving us can you just reiterate what you said prior?
As through this conversation,
Yeah.
I'm hearing 2 things that I've written down that as a board you need to decide before we move on. The first of which is, should you move the committee diet conversation up to an earlier part of the process? Right now we have it starting in the June timeframe, but if you want to do that earlier, you can move it up to kind of the October-May timeframe. The second question is whether or not you feel as a board you have the necessary input from the community to identify the values that the community has so that you can begin to articulate guardrails. And that's a matter of, do we go out and listen to our community for what their values are, or can we move forward based on what we know?
All right, I'm going to go, I'll come back, but let me just go to Commissioner Santiago.
I just want to just firstly to speak about that second question. I don't believe that we're at the place as a board to create guardrails without community input. I believe we've had conversation with community, but not a focused conversation on where do you want to see our children in the next 5 years or the next whatever the timeline of the goals are. And so I think that it would be good if we are going to move it up, that we also move up our community listening sessions up on the calendar, just so we can get that accomplished before we start going into that conversation. And so that's just my thought on that. But my question was, do you have any examples, or you've been to a lot of boards, so regarding board accountability, because although we have these conversations about being student focused and moving forward,
Okay, I'm going to ask you all to Is that the conversation?
Or moving forward, and many of our and some of our board members may publicly make it seem like they're student focused and they want to move forward, but truly behind the scenes they're harassing staff, sending emails about personal issues that has nothing to do with being student focused. But on the dais, make it seem like that's where their focus is. So I guess my question to you is for board accountability, because the staff don't know what to do. You know, they're getting these emails from you know, somebody who they may see as their boss's boss or as somebody who's their supervisor, and they're being harassed about personal issues that has nothing to do with student focus, and they're getting emails left and right. And so, what's the accountability? How does other boards provide accountability to boards? Because although on the dais they may make it seem like they're student focused, truly behind the scenes they're making us step back instead of progress to where we're trying to be as a board. And so, have you seen examples of board accountability? And if so, what's your recommendation?
Can I also interject into that? But that also means we have to be at meetings on time. That also means we have to be engaged from the dais. It also has to mean that we can't always be on our phones at the dais because people are watching and people have said some things. So all of that has to be considered, or eating at the dais. And so a lot of those things as well that we have to become more professional in.
I just want
Commissioner
to,
Santiago?
that's just a little bit separate from what I'm speaking about. You know, I agree with her, but what I'm speaking about is what's happening behind the scenes, the practices that's happening behind the scenes, and not specifically on the data.
I understand the question. The first thing I'll share is that the superintendent and the staff can't hold board members accountable for the profession, for how the board members act. The board and you as a board have to hold each other accountable. The primary reason for that is superintendent, you just mentioned earlier, coach up will help to coach you, but quite often if you imagine me coaching my supervisor. If I have an immediate supervisor, it's difficult for me to coach my immediate supervisor. So it's why we suggest boards get coaches. We'll coach you on that. To answer your question, absolutely. What we're going to start as a part of the process is every quarter, you'll see it on here, but every quarter you're going to do a quarterly board evaluation. Part of, and that board evaluation is built on the student outcomes focused governance document that you created. In that document, we'll actually start to rate you on your progress as we go throughout the year. We'll rate you on your progress. Several of the items that are in there deal with what you just shared. How is the board adhering to its own policies about how we function, how we operate? And so making sure that you do that is a part of the evaluation process and part of the growth process. And you'll hold yourselves accountable for how well you're doing that on a quarterly basis.
Okay, and I hear your answer, but and I do hear your answer, but sometimes there's like immediate things where these board members are harassing these staff, you know, like really, and I hear the evaluation and doing the survey and things of that sort. But how does that stop? You know, how does that stop or hold accountability towards that board member who may be doing things that's not student outcome focused?
That is between you and the board and how you instruct the superintendent to respond to board members when they're out of order. So you as a board will set the policy for Mr. Superintendent. If a board member is out of order, here's how we'll handle it.
So,
Let me just let the superintendent interject.
Mr. Hurd, thank you for the information. I'm taking it all in, taking my copious notes. Quick question. In the outcomes-focused governance document, one of the things that I didn't see or feel there was an opportunity to do would be to sort of do that 360-degree feedback. So, for instance, I feel that I'm a servant leader. One of the things every single year that I do is actually give my staff or my direct reports a survey for me to reflect on. Is there anything that's similar in this respect? Because again, I'm just listening to what everyone's saying. And again, people have the best of intentions, and that's the way I like to view, this work. But how do I give the pulse on you're infringing on the work? Or like, how does that look? Because there is a supervisory employee relationship there. Is there any room for that? And apologies if I missed it.
Supervisory in terms of the board evaluating you?
No. So like I'm providing my,
Feedback on us,
my one
your
board,
future.
yes.
Yeah, what you want to do is rely on your board chair to say, here's our policies. As a board chair, or board president, excuse me, I go to too many of these, and they're all different. As a board president, I am responsible for holding our board members accountable. As the superintendent, you've got to rely on your board chair to make sure they're holding your fellow board members accountable.
Got it, thank you.
Okay, I'm going to speak now, if that's all right. Okay, thank you. So I want to go back to your first, the basis of this conversation, which was around the community voice piece. And although I'm from the community, born and raised, 19th Ward, all that good stuff, and I feel that I do have a strong pulse on my community, I do believe it would be a disservice to the community if I made the assumption that I have all of the community voice. So I do think it's an important venture that we need to go into on some level. So yes, I would like to gather community voice, so I'm just weighing in on that part of the conversation. And then to the second part where we talked about accountability, I wanted to make sure I understood you right. And what I think I understood was that we as a board can put in parameters around accountability. The example I'm going to give is not the best example, but like my child, for example, and you're not my child's superintendent, so I don't mean that disparagingly. But when I think of the example of a child as the parent, if somebody is out of line and they think that they can approach my child, I give my child the exact autonomy to redirect them and say, you need to have a conversation with my mother, right? So you don't have to engage that individual who has no authority to be engaging you in that manner. Does that make sense? So are you saying that the board can say take this to the board, take your concerns to the board? So I'll use myself as an example. If I'm out of line and I'm saying, where did all these water bottles come from? Why didn't I get some free water? And why didn't you put me in the middle of the dais and give me the free water? I just have this kind of craziness going on. Would the board, and I'm asking the superintendent or someone from his cabinet, something like that, do we have the ability to say, hey, if you're getting that type of treatment, redirect Commissioner Simmons to the president with those concerns?
Or go to the board president to address those concerns, and you all as a collective board will address those concerns.
Right, so because I guess what I'm saying is I don't want folks from the cabinet or the superintendent to feel that they have to engage. But I want them to, if they have the permission not to do so, that there's clarity around that, and that
You as a board will
need to
set
set that up.
You as a board will set that policy. So
That's what I
you as a
needed.
board will tell the superintendent,
Yeah.
here's how we want you to respond. Here's how we want you and your staff to respond in these circumstances.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Santiago?
I don't have a question. I changed my mind.
Okay, so just getting back to the question that Dr. Hart asked us about, is the committee diet, do we need to put that earlier? Let's talk about that. Where would we want to put that at this point? It is between June 2025 and October 2025, and it's number 2. So what are we recommending? Commissioner Malloy?
Thanks. I would recommend that perhaps, and this is just an idea, before our organizational meeting, which is where we usually decide on chairman roles of said committees. So that's usually, it's January of 2025. I don't know if that's a possibility, but might make sense to do some sort of diet prior to then. I don't know what that'll look like.
Okay. You know what, let me apologize, because I heard what you said, committee diet, and that's what I said. But I'm looking at policy diet, so I apologize for that. So the committee diet to be, I'm looking at spring 2025, so perhaps we're making that a number 9, making that before practice board progress monitoring, conduct agenda analysis, redesign.
And we can adjust it. We can adjust, we can decide, we can adjust it.
Okay.
So if you say January, we'll adjust to make sure that
Yeah.
it happens between now and then.
Right. Any thoughts about what Commissioner Malloy said, Commissioner Vice President LeBron?
Yeah, no, I would support that. The only thing is that in January, I know it's a reorg, but it's still the middle of the actual budget process. So I just want us to be mindful of that because it is the one committee that has to sort of go through a process, and there's legal dates too that we have to follow that have to align with the state and the city council folks. So that's all. But other than that, yes, I would support even a restructure, and I'd hope that by January, and I'll just say this piece too, and to Dr. Hart, we also have so many committees because past board members had this notion that everyone needed to have a role, and so they created a role for people to have leadership. But I'm just not of the mindset that every new commissioner needs to come in and start chairing when they don't even know left or right in a district, may not even understand how a school gets into receivership, all the parameters, not just, oh, it's failing in ELA or math. There's other parameters that make up the state's determination for receivership. But previous boards in the past, I think that's my understanding of how even more committees were added on this notion that everybody should have a leadership role. I just don't believe that. And so I do, again, caution whoever, because even if it's not me for finance, I would be okay with that too, is the finance committee piece, and yeah, looking at potentially eliminating. I just would like to also add to all the board members that if we can even start sharing collectively ideas around this restructuring and maybe send them to Rahima, who can then forward a group of them to Dr. Hart so that you can see where folks are at and maybe come up with like a matrix, like, hey, 3 commissioners, sort of, these are the 3 committees they want to uplift or keep, or this is some ideas that bubbled, or that way when we do have the conversation, we already have a little bit of a head start knowing how we drag some of these meetings out.
Thank
You
you,
can,
Vice President.
and you can think through it. I'll share with you that I'm going to ask you a series of questions and ask you all as a team to respond to those questions. Based on your answers to those questions, it'll determine whether you ultimately decide, okay, this is a committee we should sunset. This is a committee we should modify. So we don't want to sunset this one, but we should modify it and treat it this way. And then here's the committees that we don't need to modify, we'll sunset. I use the word sunset on purpose because recognizing that you don't just want to stop, vote today to eliminate a committee and stop it tomorrow. We'll also have conversations about what that process looks like to make sure that if there's something legal in a committee that needs to take place, that there's another way to handle it outside of the committee process. So there are things that you can pull out of the committee process, handle them as a board, as a collective board, because it's legally required, but it doesn't have to be handled in the committee. So that's a process.
Thank you. Commissioner Patterson?
Yes. Speaking for myself and we're paying you, your organization to give us these ideas. So I'm really myself looking forward to your recommendations first before we start making those changes. You're the professional, you've been around for over 30 years. So I'm really looking forward to, what, your requests are as far as this committee diet.
Perfect. I won't dictate to you what you should do as a board, but I will ask you the questions that you need to answer for you to come to the conclusion about whether or not a committee needs to be in place or whether it doesn't. It's one of the things I think is a misnomer about our work is that we come in and tell you what to do. We tell you this is what we try to do is give you a framework for what good governance looks like, but then allow you within that framework to make your own decisions about as a board, how do you want to operate and how do you want to function. So I'll ask you the questions, but I won't dictate to you, keep this one, don't keep this one, et cetera. I'll ask you the questions.
Right. And so for clarity purposes, we're on the same page. So that wasn't even a question. You've already told us early on that you're not going to dictate things for us to do. So I don't want anyone in the room or anyone in the public thinking that, I'm asking you to dictate what we do to us. But I think it's very important, having your background and your education for over 30 years, for you to give us recommendations. And then this is my recommendation, but then allow us to have a dialogue relative to it So thank you.
And there are a couple of things as we go through the process I will give you recommendations on. And it won't be a recommendation as much as it will be something for you to consider adopting as a board, as a policy, for example, or a way of interacting with each other on during board meetings, et cetera. Those will come. I won't dictate that you do it that way, but I will offer suggestions based on that experience.
And I'll just interject this. There is is that meeting on Friday only for board presidents, or that's for all school board members around the?
It is for board presidents and council representatives.
Okay.
So we're working on whether or not we offer something for all school board members.
Okay.
Right now, we don't,
Okay.
because it would be for 78 districts,
Right.
the number of school board members we have, it would be
Right.
a huge meeting. So we don't do that. It's only for board chairs and board representatives. Sometimes they're not the same person.
Okay, but we could perhaps reach out to you if they've got some research in particular schools that may benefit us. that we
Yes,
could all right.
absolutely.
All right, thank you.
So if
thank
the
you.
board comes back and says, President Elliott, we'd like you to ask about how this happens in other school districts,
Mm-hmm.
we will send that out immediately.
All right, thank you. And let me just go, Commissioner Griffin, do you have, what's your thoughts about the committee diet being earlier in the process? Or in the timeline, let me put it that way.
Well, for me, when he came in, he made the recommendation as he went down this list. So what my concern is that when we get people to come in with recommendations, we always change them. So I'm taking it from him that this is the format that he put in because he's the expert. So I'm taking it from him that even though he's not saying that, it's up to us to change it. It doesn't matter to me. Let me take that back. It does matter to me. But for me, if I'm listening to him and he's already set it out, then I'm okay with the way he has it because he said it like this for a reason. And this is what works better from him. This is what I'm thinking. I could be totally wrong, but for me, it's okay. It can stay as it is.
All right, Commissioner Malloy? Yeah, Commissioner Simmons, any more input in this? I think I came to you before, but I wanted to just make sure. Okay.
I'm a fan of moving it up.
Okay, so we'll move it up, but then we'll work out exactly where it's going to go in the timeline. Did you have another, some input? Oh, did you not give input on it yet? Do you want to give input on it?
I think it should be moved up.
Okay, all right, so we'll work on that. And then the next question is necessary input from the community. What are we saying? Let me start with you, Chair of the Community and Intergovernmental Relations Committee.
Yes, I don't think that we should be making the guardrails or the goals, or at least the new goals or editing goals until we do have a meeting and allow the space for our community members to have that discussion. I think we've had meetings, but we haven't been able to have meetings specifically to what is the community looking for forward. And so I would love that organized conversation before we make some of those decisions.
All right, thank you. And I think that this is a whole new format, so just informing the community of this governance model that we are endeavoring to is going to be very helpful as well, and that we think that this is one of the best ways of going about reaching student outcomes. Let me go to Commissioner Patterson.
And I'm going back to the course, and I don't recall at this point in time, but I know when it comes to the goals that we had community input, but relative to the guardrails, and correct me if I'm wrong, that was something that the board came up with as a whole. The superintendent shall not do this, the superintendent shall not do that. But again, just clarify that for me. Thank you.
Happy to clarify, and great question, actually. Actually, both the vision and the values of the district are set by the board. And the vision and the values are listening to the community for what's their vision for what school board, what the school system should accomplish for your students. And then the values is what the community values. I used safety as an example earlier. The board listens to the community for those two things, and then the board translates those two things. They translate the vision for what students know we're able to do into goals. And the board translates the values of the district into guardrails. So the board does both. But both come from, the reason I keep reiterating, If you haven't listened to the community, then what you're saying is, and I heard you mention several of you, I listen to the community, but I don't know that we have listened to the community collectively as a board. And what I'm suggesting is if you as a collective board haven't listened to the community for their vision and their values, that's the process you want to go through. And from a time frame standpoint, I know that was a question that came up earlier. There's two things, just so to give you information about how this process will move forward. We would start immediately with setting up a process for you to listen to the community. What I will tell you is that if you have community focus groups around what you want for the next superintendent, et cetera, you don't want to. There are ways that we can work around that, but you've got two different types of listening that are going on at the same time. And so we'll have to set up a process for how you as a board listen, but don't conflate that with the listening for what you want in the next superintendent. Does that make sense?
It does, and is that on here somewhere as far as the community input, or no, it's not on here yet?
It is. There's two different timelines in that schedule.
Yep.
One timeline is if you feel you need to go out and do the community listening. The other timeline is if you feel you don't. So it's actually in here. And if you look, it's on the smaller side of the page, but I put two processes in the piece that has smaller print. One process if you go out and do listening, community listening. The other process if you don't. So it's built in.
Okay, great. And you mentioned something that I had in my notes earlier, recommendation on community organizations. And I'd like to hear a little bit more on that, who you think should be or should not be a part of the process as far as community organizations. Do we open it up to everyone? Like I've heard, for example, that the county executive is gonna, they want him or her or his organization or his office to be a part of that, the mayor's office. And so what do you think about these representatives being a part of the process? Is it a true reflection of the community, or is it political?
So you as a board want to make sure you're listening to all members of the community. The mayor is just as much a member of the community as an individual who is on the north side of the district or the south side of the district or east or west. So you as a board will identify who is representative to make sure that you get the voice of the community. Sure. And the other thing that's important about that is making sure that you feel as though you have gone into parts of the community that you don't typically hear from. So as an example, to do this listening process without, for example, having a session with parents and community members that don't speak English, making sure you have a session with those who speak only Spanish or another language with a translator is an important part of making sure that you don't miss a part of the community that you don't typically hear from. I'm only using that as an example. I'm not saying
That's a good example.
Yeah, I'm not saying that that's comprehensive. All I'm saying is you decide as a board, have we heard from all the different parts of the community that give us a good feel for what they want for their children?
Yeah, thanks for the clarity. I really appreciate it.
All right, Commissioner Malloy?
Yeah, thank you. And I know earlier I posed a question about, do we have a good gauge on community values based on conversations we've already had? I'm certainly not advocating for not listening to our community in any way. I would support that. I think my fear more than anything is that we delay this like 5-6 months before we actually come up with guardrails. And so realistically speaking, if we need to have these communities, well, we need to have community listening sessions from a broad range or groups of people. Realistically speaking, how long should that take us to get that information? And, we're doing the superintendent firm community groups or the search process firms. How do we do that while respecting that other process that we're going through? Or can we use some of that information? I know you touched on that a little bit, but realistically speaking, how long should this take us?
So I'm looking at the timeline, and I do see that around 2 listening session is in the end of, looks like the end of, is it the first 3 weeks in January? Am I looking at that correctly, or?
That's correct. What you'll see in the more detailed timeline, which I'll go back and adjust after this conversation, and it's hard to see on this piece of paper. I'll point it out to you this way, since you are looking at the smaller version. If you look at the smaller version, It says in the development process, you'll see community listening
Yeah, I
process.
see another one here.
And it's about halfway down on the page, about middle of the page. There is a timeline that follows that community listening process. So about halfway down the page in October, you'll see it's aligned with October 20th, 2024. There is a gray box that starts to go out to the right and runs through February. Do you see that? And that middle box is if you feel you need to do community listening, then that process will start in October. And then there are subsequent processes that will follow with setting the goals and the guardrails in that bottom section that lays out the timeline that will take you to the end of the year. Keep in mind that you are practicing, so just so you know about developing the process, even as you're doing the community listening, setting the guardrails, you'll still be practicing how to monitor, practicing how to answer questions in the spring. So it won't throw you terribly off. You just won't have a full monitoring calendar until after you've set the goals, you got the goals, after you've set the guardrails and the interim guardrails. So that full monitoring calendar will actually start next year anyway. You'll be doing the practicing in the spring around monitoring goals, how to learn the process, so it won't delay that part of the process at all.
So it's, so those community listening sessions would start in October ideally, but can we move that up, the creation of those guardrails? Do you think that that is a
Once you
realistic?
finish the listening, you can go through the process of creating a guardrail. So as soon as you finish the community listening, if that's what you choose to do, as soon as you finish that process, you can start creating the guardrail, so you don't have to wait. The only challenge I'll say is the reason that gray line is kind of a longer gray line is because you're intertwining listening to the community about vision and values with the superintendent search process. And so I work with
And I'm also
Madam.
looking at like our budget process as well.
Your budget process will come up. So I'll work with Madam President on how you want to do that, whether we can do it together with some portions of the superintendent listening process where you kind of split the process, or whether you do it separately from the superintendent process. Those are things that we can discuss after this to work out how long or short that community listening process is.
So I'm thinking, I'm looking at, is it 4 listening sessions and then one where we review, or what are we looking at? I see one that says analysis of the data from the community listening sessions, then I see a community listening session, host listening sessions, gather feedback, and then a community listening meeting planning document review, community listening process planning, and then around 2 listening sessions. And so how many listening sessions are there? Because I think some of this.
So you all decide as a board how many listening sessions
Okay.
you want to have, where you want to have them in the community, how many you want to have. Again, you don't have to have all the board at every community listening session. What we encourage you to do is go out at least in pairs, but not all of you need to go out to every part of the community. So you can break that up so that you're not taxing yourself. So you can do more community listening sessions than just 4. It's not just 4. The second thing that we typically do as part of the process is that we do ask you to do a survey, because quite often you might get more information, or you might get individuals in the community who respond to a survey who don't or can't get to one of your community listening sessions to provide their feedback. So that data analysis process is then codifying what you heard in each of the community listening sessions. So there'll be notes taken, summarize those notes, et cetera, and then codifying, if you decide to do a survey, what the survey says, then taking those 2 pieces of information, that's what you as a board will then summarize into your values and then set the goals.
All right, Vice President LeBron.
You said survey, and that's like a trigger word for me, because it's my belief, and working directly day to day with people in this community, a lot of families, there's a lot of poverty in Rochester and a lot of people struggling in issues. And there are privileges that exist here that may never understand the challenges that a lot of our families are facing. But with that said, I want to be mindful that we're also surveying for the superintendent search. This community
doing a
has been
lot.
surveyed out. We're going to get folks that come in and say, why am I coming to this again for yet a third, 100 superintendent search? But my request is actually that there is some sort of level setting with the community about a governance model and why this listening session and these input sessions are drastically different from anything we've ever done in the past. Because my concern is we're going to ask people to give up their time, which is very precious and valuable, for us to listen to them, and then what? They've gone through this. You can go to our website. I'm sure our clerk can pull up historically years and years of surveys, listening sessions, community input sessions, under the governance and interrelations committee. We've done it at multiple schools. We had a spring one, we had a fall one, different topics. So I say all
Again,
that.
if you have it, you don't need to you don't need to repeat it. So that's
We
why
have
the question for me is
we have
whether you
hundreds
need-
of feedback, but I do think that this is a little bit different if we level set along with you all this community to understand that this is an actual training for the board, and that this is a training for the board to learn how to actually govern a school district, right? And I do think that's a different conversation than saying, come so we can hear about all of your gripes and griefs that you have, and all of that will come with it if we don't level set and make the distinction of why this is different. But with that said, then it requires my fellow colleagues to also act different in those settings and not come in like we're going to come in and solve everything that everyone's giving us input on, because we're not miracle workers. But I do think that level setting and understanding what we're going to do with this information, why it's going to look different, why it's going to be different. I think if we did that, we actually would have more community members potentially engage, and an appreciation that they're just not coming to waste their time yet again. That's just a fact.
And just so you know, you will have a script. So when you go out to do this, every board member will have a script, and every session will follow the same script. So there won't be, we've gone off and on this tangent or asked this question, and there'll be a process for pulling the community back to responding to that script. You won't be able to control everything they respond to, but your job is to pull them back to that script. Here's why we're here.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear there'll be some form of talking points, and I agree with what you said. I was thinking when Vice President was talking about when the distinguished educator came, and I was in the audience, this is years ago, but even with that level setting and that pointed conversation, there was certainly folks who really just had a lot of grievances, and even though it was like, this is what we're talking about tonight, it was still that very, hey, listen, I'm trying to get a transfer here, and, it became very individual. So
That will happen.
hearing you say
But-
talking points will be there.
But you'll
is
have
helpful.
a script to constantly work. This is what we're here about. This is what we're here to ask you about, and we're going to follow this script.
And I apologize to my fellow Commissioner Santiago. He was supposed to be next, so
You took my spot.
Commissioner Santiago, I'm sorry about that. My apologies.
No, I just think that's a really good idea, and possibly seeing how we can. I mean, it's starting in October, but how we can fast track the process, and then also just to bring it up now, as a general idea, we'll talk about this deeper later, but we should have in-persons, but we also should have Zooms to make sure that we're making this accessible to everybody, and like Dr. Hart said, also seeing how we could tap into our resources for people who speak other languages to be able to have the conversation and have input in the conversation. And I think it's also the way that it is advertised and the way that we are speaking as commissioners to make clear that we're moving into a new direction, and we're trying to make sure that we're putting our community's voice in these conversations.
All right, Commissioner Santiago. And I just want to make sure that I'm including Commissioner Griffin. Is there any, with regard to the necessary input from the community? You want to comment on that, Commissioner?
I think it's very clear for me, thank you, President Elliott, that I believe that the community should be an asset in any decisions that we make in reference to superintendent or the things that we have on the board, because they are part of our stakeholders, as are our children. So I don't believe it should be moved. I believe, I see on the other side that, and I actually highlighted where we have a lot of, there's a lot of interest for community engagement, so I don't think it should be moved. And here again, I just will reiterate that community is key. We need to represent our community, and the community needs to be a part of all the decisions that we make because they are the stakeholders, just as our children and administration. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you. All right, our next steps here. Well, we have to look at revising this, I think, based on the conversation that we've had tonight. And so I think the next step is, once this is revised, we need to vote on it at some
You
point.
can vote on it and adopt it.
Yep.
But I'll get the revised version.
Okay.
So what I'm hearing is that you do want to do community listening, and you do want to update or move up the committee conversation so that you're finished with that process around the January timeframe. I will revise this based on those two, and then you'll get a detailed new implementation timeframe that you can vote on and approve.
All right, all right.
Can I say something?
Commissioner
Yeah,
Patterson?
just for clarification purposes, I'm not for moving up the timeline, for the community. I think the way it is on the sheet, it's not rushing it. Do I think we should move up the committee diet? Yes. But, for the public, I think it's where it should be, personally. Thank you.
What should be, because I didn't get that part. Say that again.
As far as the community portion, the bringing them in and having input, it begins in October. I think it's end of October from what I'm seeing here into November. I think it's, for me, I think that's okay, where it is. But as far as the committee diet, I think we should move that up because we're all in agreement pretty much that we should, change that.
All right, thank you.
I just for clarification, we're not changing the timeline when it comes to the community hearing. I'm asking, that wasn't the agreement.
No, I didn't hear any of that change.
Oh, okay, so that was
Just
never,
the,
that was never on the table. All right,
Yeah,
thank you.
just the committee diet. Yeah. Commissioner Malloy?
It was my understanding that we were moving up community listening, though, so that we could create our guardrails.
That's what I heard.
That is correct.
Am I correct in
That is
in
correct.
saying that? So I would support moving up community listening, move that timeline up a bit, not by much, but it would allow us to solidify guardrails, which
All right, so
we are
we're
in
talking
dire
about,
need of.
we're talking about October 24, right?
Yeah, it's
begin,
October
we can, but then
24. What I'll
finishing the
do,
process prior.
Madam President, if it's okay with you, is we'll sit down after this. I'll revise the timeline, but we'll do two things. The first of which is we'll set out a new timeline for when you do the committee review. We'll do that as a board work session. What we'll also do, and we'll talk about whether or not you want to do them together or separate, is a board training on how to do community listening. So just so you know, that's not before you go out and do community listening. We're not going to say, here's a date on the calendar, go do it. We're going to sit down with you as a board and say, here's the process that you want to go through. Here's the script. And now you can go out and do your community. So the first thing that we'll do once once I go back and revise this is we'll set a date for when we do that training session on how to do community listening.
All right. Commissioner Patterson?
Yeah, and that's going to take some time if we're going to do it right, the way it's supposed to be.
What's going to take time?
We have to have the training. He wants us to have a training prior to having these community forums. So I think we're trying to push it up respectfully, to my colleagues. I think we're rushing things.
We can move it. We can move it pretty quickly. The only challenge, we already have the materials, we already have the training, so we can just come back and do the training.
But it's getting the message out there to this public. We
You
know
have
that
to
it's very
decide.
difficult.
So we'll start working on it. You have to decide who do you want to listen to, and we also have to look at what is your search firm. I don't know, and you can answer this question, but is your search firm doing the community listening and focus groups, or are you doing the community listening and focus groups? They're doing it. So it's essentially what's happening is you're relying on them to tell you what the community said, unless you go to some of them. This process relies on you to go out and listen to the community, which is a little different.
See,
Right, I'd
and
like to
that's
have
what
the-
the- I'm sorry, go ahead.
Maybe our clerk's input, since she's going to be scheduling all these things, can we have some input from you? What your thoughts are on this?
In terms of the listening sessions? I think looking at this calendar here, as I was reading it, the listening sessions were not scheduled to start till the end of October. Oh, can you hear
Can
me?
you give her another mic, please?
Yeah.
Is that better? Yes. Okay. So looking at this calendar, I do see that the listening sessions were set to start at the end of October. I would actually suggest that maybe we look at the first or second week in November so that we can make sure that there's accommodations for you all to have the training. I think for me, the biggest issue is commissioner availability to be together and to receive that. So if you all are able to make your schedules open sooner, then I think that Director Hart has already indicated that they have most of the materials and things ready. So that part's not the issue. It's going to be more around the challenges of you all schedule.
So Commissioner Malloy, but you wanted to do it earlier, so how do you respond to that?
I guess my concern, though, it's not just wanting to do this earlier. It's more that we need to have guardrails in place when we start our budget process. I think that guardrails need to be decided on because they really do drive budgetary decisions.
They do, but let me clarify. I think one of the things, and you'll notice alignment to the budget, we explicitly put alignment to the budget for the next fiscal year's budget on purpose, because you're not going to get through and be acclimated to this process by this budget season. So making sure that everything is aligned this budget season, you've got goals, so you can start the process of looking at whether or not the goals are aligned in the budget, but you won't have the whole process.
Okay.
Either way you go, you won't
So
have the
I
whole
think
process done before that.
That's a relief to hear because I was thinking that we needed to have all of this place
Before the
for
budget
the
season.
budget.
No,
I
good
think
question.
my concern, though, is if we wait to adopt the actual guardrails until like May, and I can't really see the fine print here because
Sorry.
it's really small. But even with my readers on, so clearly I need stronger ones. Is it a May on this calendar? Was it originally a May adoption of those guardrails?
It was originally earlier, but if you have to go back and you'll notice that the line for adopting the guardrails is kind of a span. The end of that line ends in March. So either way, you'll be finished with that process in March. So it would have been earlier, so that's why I made it a longer span. If you didn't do the community listening, it would have been earlier in that time frame. But if you did do the community listening, it would be toward the end of that time frame. But either way, February, March, you should have everything done and ready
So
to
we
go.
should have guardrails probably approved by the end of March, most likely. And this isn't going to get stretched out into,
No, it won't get stretched out in the next year.
all right, thank you.
All right, Commissioner Simmons?
And just for clarity, so this community listening that we're looking at here, you said is for us to do. So there'll
for
be
you.
two sets of community listening. There'll be the one that our search firm is conducting, and then there'll be this one, which is cool with me because I feel like people hear and interpret things differently, and I can be, two people can be in the room having the same conversation, walk away with different thoughts. So that's good to know. Okay.
And let me apologize to my vice president because
Yeah, because I was waiting, and then she just
sorry.
skipped me. No.
my apologies.
No, I just wanted to address, and again, I'm always mindful of listening audience, that the conversations have already been had and started in terms of aligning the budget with the goals that exist and the strategic plan. Because I do not want to forget that there is a long-term strategic plan that was approved by the state, by the board, but it's gone through the community. There's been not little, but, focus groups and things like that from community members to develop an actual strategic plan, but there was never alignment to any of these things in the past, and that has already started. So regardless of guardrails came up right now, the goals and the strategic plan are my focus priority of the alignment for this upcoming budget, because I do think it takes not just the board, this community, even city government, because we're so intimately, involved in our finances, to also understand a different process even for us, because they're used to that really wonky process that we've had in the past, again, with the board priorities coming at the end. To them as well, we have had city council members in the past also bring their priorities after this board has voted, and then they've determined not to vote on the budget on their end, but it doesn't do anything. It's a symbolic vote. But I just want to put that out there because for me as the chair of finance, there was no way that we were going to have community input sessions, develop guardrails,
Not for this
and
budget.
align that for this budget year with an interim superintendent and an interim CFO.
Yeah, and that's why in the calendar, the budget process is for next year's budget cycle, not this one. And I will share, I don't think I responded earlier, but the process of board members making line item changes to the budget is a recipe for keeping student outcomes low.
Say that again now?
I said the board making line item adjustments in the budget
okay.
or anyone else, is a recipe for keeping student outcomes low.
Okay.
Please let City Council know that too.
Commissioner Santiago?
Yeah, I just wanted to say with the new information that's been sent out, I think when it comes to the community listening sessions, I mean, of course, we should have that, but the timeline that's provided is perfect for what we're planning to do.
All right, thank you. Anything else?
I do have a question for clarity. When would you all be anticipating to come forward to vote on this timeline? So our next meeting where you're considering resolutions and items is October 8th, which is next week, and then you would have the board business meeting on the 24th.
There's no other meeting between August 8th and October 8th and October 24th?
There's a finance meeting on October 15th.
Okay,
Can we do a special meeting or just vote on it?
a special meeting after finance.
Finance.
Is that all right with my colleagues?
What date is that?
October 15th.
October
15th.
15th.
It's the finance committee.
To vote on the implementation plan? I couldn't quite hear what
That's
you're
sufficient
saying.
time for you, Director Hart?
Yep.
I will be zooming into that meeting. I'll be in Dallas at the Council for Great
Oh,
City
you're going to be in
Schools.
Dallas too, aren't you?
I'll be in Dallas, I hope.
Yeah, so
On
none
the
of you
15th.
got
I
to be
couldn't
in
hear, I thought,
Dallas.
that's why I was asking. I thought you said was it to vote on the implementation timeline?
That
Yes.
was my question.
I'll have we'll work on the implementations timeline starting tomorrow.
How
so
many
I'll start
people
making
going to
those changes.
Dallas are not going to be there? Okay. You going to?
I will be in Dallas as well.
So-
Charisma will clerk the.
So we may have to wait till the 24th. Is that too late?
We can start the work before you officially vote on the timeline. So if
Okay.
we know this is where we're headed, we'll start on the work before that
Yeah,
time.
we'll
We
do
won't
the
wait
24th.
to start working.
To the vote? Okay.
And if I can have one more point of clarity.
Say that again, I'm sorry?
One more point of clarity. In terms of the committee diet, so you all generally, appoint chairs in January. I guess I was not clear from the conversation around when you wanted to explore that.
Yeah, we talked
I heard
about
before
earlier
that also
around
for
that time, but we didn't get into any specifics. So let me open it up to my colleagues.
Them to put up the
You're going to put the timeline?
I can update the timeline. I can put it on the timeline, and you can decide within that
Yeah,
time
the
frame when you
organizational
want to do
meeting
it.
is January
January 2nd.
2nd. All right,
So I'll work with you on that.
all right. All right, anything else? Any other questions? Ray, any closing? Did you have any questions?
Not about the motion, but.
No. Any final thoughts from you, Dr. Hart?
Just thank you all. Thank you for the opportunity to work with you, and thank you for what you're committing to do for kids.
All right, thank you. So if there's nothing else for the good of the order, is there a motion to adjourn? Moved by Vice President LeBron, seconded by Commissioner Simmons. All those in favor?
Aye.
Good night, everybody. Thank you. Great work
you all.
that we've done this evening. Great.